The Earl of Ashworth arrived at Thornwood Manor with a false name, a false purpose, and a heart so heavy with grief that he believed himself incapable of feeling anything ever again. He had not expected to fall in love. He had certainly not expected to meet a woman who would look at him, not at his title, not at his fortune, not at the power he wielded over half of Yorkshire, but at him as though he were simply a man worthy of her attention. And he had absolutely not expected to destroy everything between them in a single, devastating moment of truth. But that was precisely what happened. The day Eleanor Blackwood learned his real identity was the day she walked out of his life forever. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not throw things or demand explanations. She simply looked at him with those clear gray eyes that had once held such warmth, and she said, "You lied to me." And then she left. That had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of haunting memories. 3 weeks of the Earl of Ashworth, the man who had faced French cavalry without flinching, who had negotiated treaties with men who would have slit his throat in an instant, discovering that he was utterly powerless against the quiet devastation of a woman's rejection. He stood now in the library of his own estate, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens, and he could think of nothing but her. The memory of that final conversation replayed in his mind like a wound that refused to heal. "You lied to me," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eleanor, please, don't." She had held up her hand, and he had seen it trembling. "Don't say my name like that. Don't pretend there is anything between us now. There is everything between us. There is nothing." Her eyes had been wet, but she had refused to let the tears fall. "There was never anything real. I loved a man who did not exist. I loved the kind, gentle Mr. Thomas Ashford who told me he was a simple merchant's son. I loved the man who walked with me through the gardens and listened to my foolish dreams. I loved the man who made me believe." Her voice had broken, just for a moment. "But that man was a lie. I never lied about how I felt. You lied about everything that mattered." She had stepped back from him, and the distance between them had felt like an ocean. "You let me believe you were someone you were not. You let me fall in love with a fiction. And now you expect me to simply accept that the man I poured my heart out to, the man I told my deepest secrets, was the Earl of Ashworth all along. Eleanor, do you know what I told you?" Her voice had risen, the first hint of real anger breaking through her composure. "I told you about my father's debts. I told you about my mother's illness. I told you about the humiliation of watching our family home sold to strangers. I told you things I have never told another living soul. And all the while, you were the Earl of Ashworth, one of the richest men in England, watching me struggle and knowing you could have saved me with a single word. That was precisely why I couldn't. You could have told me the truth." She had finally let the tears fall, and each one had felt like a knife to his heart. "You could have trusted me, but you didn't. You never trusted me. You only wanted to play at being ordinary, to have some simple country girl admire you for who you were not. You are not a simple country girl. I am nothing." She had shaken her head, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I am a nobody, a poor merchant's daughter who was fool enough to believe that a handsome stranger might actually care for her. And you are an earl. You are everything I could never have. And you knew it. You knew it from the very beginning, and you chose to deceive me anyway, because I wanted you to see me as I truly am. I have no idea who you truly are." She had looked at him then, and there was nothing but sorrow in her gaze. "I only know the man who lied to me, and I cannot love a man I do not know." She had walked away. He had let her. He had stood there like a fool, watching the woman he loved disappear through the garden gate, and he had not followed her. He had not explained. He had not fought for her, because what could he possibly say? She was right. He had deceived her. He had come to Thornwood Manor with the express purpose of hiding his identity. He had allowed her to believe he was Thomas Ashford, a simple merchant's son with no title, no fortune, no power. He had let her fall in love with a fiction. And now he was paying the price. The Earl of Ashworth had not always been a man capable of such deception. There had been a time, 6 months ago to be precise, when he had been simply Lord Thomas Ashworth, the eldest son of the late Earl of Ashworth, a respected soldier who had served his country with distinction and returned home to find his father dead and his inheritance in chaos. His father had been a gambler. Not the charming kind who lost a few £100 at cards and laughed it off. The destructive kind. The kind who had mortgaged everything, the estate, the land, the very future of the Ashworth name, to fuel a habit that had eventually killed him. Thomas had returned from the war to discover that his father had left him nothing but debts. Mountains of them. The estate was crumbling. The tenants were neglected. The fortune that should have been his was gone, swallowed by gambling dens and loan sharks and a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim a youth that had long since passed. He had spent the past 6 months putting things right. It had been exhausting, humiliating, and deeply personal work. He had sold half the land. He had dismissed servants he had known since childhood. He had negotiated with creditors who had looked at him with barely concealed glee, knowing that the mighty Earl of Ashworth was now at their mercy. And through it all, he had discovered something about himself. He had discovered that being the Earl of Ashworth was a burden he had never wanted. He had discovered that the title meant nothing to him, nothing but obligation and duty and a lifetime of pretending to be something he was not. And he had discovered that what he truly craved was simplicity, honesty, a life where he could be judged not by the name he had inherited, but by the man he had become, which was precisely why he had done something rather foolish. He had run away, not forever, just for a week. 1 week of freedom, 1 week of being nobody, 1 week of escaping the weight of the Ashworth name. He had told his solicitor he was going to Scotland to inspect some properties. He had told his servants he was visiting an old army friend. He had packed a single bag, taken a modest carriage, and traveled to the small village of Thornwood in the Yorkshire countryside. It was not far from his own estate, only a few hours' journey, but it might as well have been another world. Thornwood was small, quiet, and utterly unremarkable. It had a single inn, a church, a market square, and a grand manor house that belonged to Lord Thornwood, a distant cousin of Thomas's mother. Thomas had never met Lord Thornwood. He knew only that the man was elderly, eccentric, and had no direct heirs. He also knew that Lord Thornwood had a habit of taking in young women who had fallen on hard times and offering them positions as companions or governesses. It was the sort of information that might have seemed irrelevant to a man like Thomas. But to a man who was looking for a place to disappear for a while, to a man who had spent 6 months being the Earl of Ashworth and was desperately tired of it, it was the perfect opportunity. He had arrived in Thornwood on a crisp autumn afternoon, presented himself at the inn as Thomas Ashford, a merchant from London who had come to the countryside for his health, and promptly discovered that Lord Thornwood was in need of a secretary. It had been the simplest thing in the world to offer his services. "Your handwriting is excellent," Lord Thornwood had observed, examining the sample Thomas had provided, "and your references are impeccable. But you must understand, Mr. Ashford, the position is not a demanding one. I am an old man with simple needs. I require someone to organize my correspondence, manage my accounts, and occasionally read aloud to me in the evenings. I would be honored, my lord." "No, no, no." Lord Thornwood had waved a gnarled hand dismissively. "None of that, my lord, nonsense. I am Lord Thornwood to the world, but in this house, I am simply Mr. Thornwood. I have no patience for ceremony. Are you married, Mr. Ashford?" "No, sir." "Any children?" "No, sir." "Good. Then you will have no distractions. The old man had studied him with surprisingly sharp eyes. You seem like a decent sort, quiet, well-mannered. You'll do. And just like that, Thomas had become Mr. Thomas Ashford, secretary to Lord Thornwood. He had expected to spend his days in comfortable anonymity, sorting through papers and listening to the old man's rambling stories. He had not expected to meet her. Eleanor Blackwood had been living at Thornwood Manor for nearly 2 years when Thomas Ashford arrived. She was the companion to Lord Thornwood's niece, a young woman named Lady Margaret who had been sent to the countryside after a scandal in London. Eleanor's role was simple: to keep Margaret company, to ensure she stayed out of trouble, and to provide a respectable presence for a young woman whose reputation had been damaged by circumstances beyond her control. Eleanor understood damaged reputations. She had been the daughter of a moderately successful merchant, the sort of family that was respectable but not wealthy, comfortable but not important. Her father had been a good man but not a good businessman. He had made a series of poor investments, borrowed money he could not repay, and died leaving his wife and daughter with nothing. Her mother had been devastated. Her mother had retreated into a world of illness and grief, leaving Eleanor to manage the household on a dwindling income. They had been forced to sell their home, their possessions, everything that had once defined their comfortable existence. They had been reduced to living in a small cottage on the edge of the village, dependent on the charity of neighbors who pitied them but could not save them. And then Lord Thornwood had offered Eleanor a position. She had hesitated to accept. It was one thing to be poor. It was another to be a servant. But her mother needed medicine and food and a roof over her head, and Eleanor had swallowed her pride and accepted. It had been the most difficult decision of her life, and it had been the most liberating. At Thornwood Manor, Eleanor had discovered something she had never known in her previous life: purpose. She had discovered that she was capable, intelligent, and resourceful. She had discovered that she did not need to be the wife of a wealthy man to have value. She had discovered that she could be happy, truly happy, living a simple life of honest work. She had also discovered that she was lonely. It was not a loneliness that could be fixed by company. She had plenty of company. Lord Thornwood was a kind and generous employer. Lady Margaret was a sweet girl, if somewhat spoiled. The servants were friendly. The villagers were welcoming. But Eleanor had never quite been able to find anyone who truly understood. Eleanor had been in the garden, cutting flowers for the evening table, when she had looked up and seen a stranger walking along the path. He was tall, dark-haired, and dressed in simple but well-made clothing. He had the bearing of a man who had spent time in the military, straight-backed, confident, watchful. She had not known who he was. She had only known that he was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Good afternoon," he had said, stopping a few feet away. "I apologize for startling you.
I'm Thomas Ashford,
Lord Thornwood's new secretary." "Eleanor Blackwood," she had replied, managing a polite smile. "I'm Lady Margaret's companion." "Ah." He had nodded, as though this explained something. "You're the one who keeps the household running smoothly." "I do my best. I've heard nothing but praise for you from the servants." She had felt herself blushing. "That's very kind of them, and of you to mention it." They had stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. Eleanor had been acutely aware of the flowers in her basket, the dirt on her hands, the simple cotton dress that had been mended so many times she had lost count. She had felt utterly inadequate, and yet he had not seemed to notice her inadequacies. He had looked at her with genuine interest, as though she were someone worth speaking to. "If you'll excuse me," she had said finally, "I need to take these to the house." "Of course. I'm sorry to have interrupted your work." "You didn't interrupt." She had hesitated, then added, "It's nice to meet someone new. We don't get many visitors here." "I'm not exactly a visitor. I'll be staying for a while. Then I hope you'll enjoy your time at Thornwood." She had walked back to the house, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. She had told herself it was nothing, just the natural reaction of a young woman to a handsome stranger. It meant nothing. She had been wrong. Over the following weeks, Thomas Ashford became a regular presence in Eleanor's life. It was impossible to avoid him. Thornwood Manor was a large house, but it was also a quiet one. The servants had their routines. Lord Thornwood had his habits. Lady Margaret had her lessons and her walks and her endless, tedious conversations about fashion and society. And Thomas Ashford, Thomas, was everywhere. He was in the library, reading aloud to Lord Thornwood in the evenings. He was in the dining room, sharing meals with the family. He was in the garden, taking his morning walks at precisely the same time Eleanor took hers. It was not deliberate, could not be deliberate. He had no way of knowing her schedule, of planning his movements to coincide with hers. And yet, somehow, they kept meeting. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood. Good morning, Mr. Ashford. Lovely weather we're having." "Yes, quite lovely. Would you like to walk with me? I'm told the rose garden is particularly beautiful at this time of year." She had accepted. Of course she had accepted. How could she possibly refuse? They had walked together through the gardens, talking about nothing and everything. He had asked her about her family, her childhood, her hopes for the future. She had asked him about London, about his travels, about his time in the army. He had told her stories of the war that had made her shiver with horror and admiration. She had told him about her father's death, her mother's illness, the slow, grinding poverty that had stolen everything she had ever known. He had listened. He had truly listened, not offering empty platitudes or awkward sympathy, but simply letting her speak. And in those moments, walking together through the gardens, Eleanor had felt something she had not felt in years. She had felt seen. It happened on a rainy afternoon in late November. They had been in the library, Eleanor sorting through Lady Margaret's correspondence, Thomas organizing Lord Thornwood's papers, when the storm had grown too fierce for anyone to leave. "Looks like we're trapped," Thomas had observed, glancing out at the rain-soaked windows. "So it seems. Does that bother you?" "Not at all." She had looked at him and smiled. "I've always loved the rain. Feels cleansing, like the world is being washed clean." "That's a beautiful way to put it. I'm full of beautiful thoughts." She had laughed, surprised at her own boldness. "I just don't always share them." "I'm glad you share them with me." The words had hung in the air between them, charged with something that Eleanor had been trying very hard to ignore. "Thomas," she had said slowly, "I should tell you something." "What is it?" "I don't know how to say this." She had set down her papers, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to make things awkward between us, but I can't pretend." "Turn around," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need to see your face." He had turned, and she had looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you?" she had asked finally. "Eleanor." "Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Ashworth." He had forced the words out, knowing there was no point in lying. "I am the Earl of Ashworth. The Earl of Ashworth." She had repeated the words as though they were foreign to her. "The Earl of Ashworth, one of the richest men in England. And you let me believe you were a merchant's son." "I didn't let you believe anything. You lied to me." Her voice had broken. "You lied to me from the very first moment we met. It wasn't like that. I came here to escape my life, to escape the title. I needed to be someone else for a while. So you chose to be a liar. I chose to be free. And what about me?" She had turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Did you ever think about how I would feel when I found out the truth? Did you ever consider what it would cost me? I considered it every single day. He had crossed to her, desperate to make her understand. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that you would look at me the way you're looking at me now. He had reached for her hands, but she had pulled away. Afraid that you would see only the title, only the fortune, only everything that makes me who I am. I wanted you to love me for myself, Eleanor. Not for what I own. I loved you for who I thought you were. She had shaken her head. But you weren't that person. You were never that person. It was all a lie. It wasn't a lie. Everything I felt for you was real. Everything I said to you was the truth. Except the most important thing of all. Her voice had been hollow. You never told me who you really were. You never gave me the chance to love the real you. Can't you see? The real me is the man you fell in love with. The man who walked with you in the garden. The man who listened to your dreams. The man who wanted nothing more than to build a life with you. That was real, Eleanor. That was the truest thing I've ever been. And the Earl. She had looked at him, her eyes full of pain. What about him? What about the title? What about the fortune? What about all the things you didn't tell me? I was going to tell you everything. I planned to tell you on Christmas Eve. I thought if I could show you. You thought if you could show me how much money you had, I would forgive you.
No.
He had shaken his head, frustrated and desperate. No, you're twisting everything. I thought if you could see me, truly see me. After you knew the truth, you would understand that I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to be loved for who I am, not for what I have. And do you think that makes it better? Her voice had risen. Do you think it makes it okay that you lied to me every single day we were together? Every conversation, every kiss, every moment of intimacy. It was all built on a foundation of lies. Eleanor, I told you everything about my life. She had begun to pace, her hands shaking at her sides. I told you about my father's debts. I told you about my mother's illness. I told you about the humiliation of losing our home. And you listened to all of it, knowing you could have saved us with a single word. You watched me struggle, watched my mother struggle, and you said nothing. Because I couldn't. You couldn't what? You couldn't be honest with me? You couldn't trust me with the truth. I couldn't risk you loving me for my money. His voice had cracked. I've spent my entire life being loved for what I have, not for who I am. My father loved his fortune more than he loved me. My mother loved the title more than she loved her son. The people who courted me, the women who pursued me, they saw only the Earl. They never saw Thomas. So you decided to test me. Her voice had gone cold. You decided to pretend to be someone else, to see if I would love you. Like I was some sort of experiment.
No.
No, it wasn't like that. He had raked a hand through his hair, struggling to find the right words. I came here to escape my life, Eleanor. I never intended to fall in love. But then I met you, and you were everything I had ever wanted. And I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you would see me differently. I see you differently now. She had stopped pacing, turning to face him with a shattered expression. I see a man who didn't trust me. A man who thought I was shallow enough to love only a title and a fortune. A man who valued his own fears above my right to know the truth. It wasn't about trust. It was about everything. She had cut him off, her voice trembling but firm. Everything we had was built on a lie. And I can't love a man I don't truly know. Eleanor, please, don't. She had held up her hand, and he had seen it shaking. Don't say my name like that. Don't pretend there is anything between us now. There is everything between us. There is nothing. Her eyes had filled with tears, but she had refused to let them fall. There was never anything real. I loved a man who did not exist. I loved the kind, gentle Mr. Thomas Ashford who told me he was a simple merchant's son. I loved the man who walked with me through the gardens and listened to my foolish dreams. I loved the man who made me believe. Her voice had broken, but that man was a lie. I never lied about how I felt. You lied about everything that mattered. She had stepped back from him, and the distance between them had felt like an ocean. You let me believe you were someone you were not. You let me fall in love with a fiction. And now you expect me to simply accept that the man I poured my heart out to, the man I told my deepest secrets, was the Earl of Ashworth all along. Eleanor, do you know what I told you? Her voice had risen, the first hint of real anger breaking through her composure. I told you about my father's debts. I told you about my mother's illness. I told you about the humiliation of watching our family home sold to strangers. I told you things I have never told another living soul. And all the while, you were the Earl of Ashworth, one of the richest men in England, watching me struggle and knowing you could have saved me with a single word. That was precisely why I couldn't. You could have told me the truth. She had finally let the tears fall, and each one had felt like a knife to his heart. You could have trusted me, but you didn't. You never trusted me. You only wanted to play at being ordinary, to have some simple country girl admire you for who you were not. You are not a simple country girl. I am nothing. She had shaken her head, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. I am a nobody, a poor merchant's daughter who was fool enough to believe that a handsome stranger might actually care for her. And you are an earl. You are everything I could never have. And you knew it. 21 days of silence. 21 days of staring at the walls of his library, replaying every moment, every word, every look. 21 days of hating himself for the stupid, arrogant, desperate choice that had cost him the only woman he had ever truly loved. The Earl of Ashworth sat in his leather armchair, a glass of brandy untouched on the table beside him, and wondered how he had managed to make such a complete mess of everything. He had come to Yorkshire to escape his title. He had planned to spend 1 week as an ordinary man, to remember what it felt like to be judged by his character rather than his fortune. He had expected anonymity. He had expected peace. He had not expected to fall in love. And he had certainly not expected to fall in love with a woman who valued honesty above all else. Your lordship. Thomas looked up to see his butler, Mr. Henderson, hovering in the doorway. What is it? A letter has arrived for you. I thought you might want to see it immediately. Leave it on the desk. It's from Miss Blackwood, sir. Thomas was on his feet before he had consciously decided to move. His heart was pounding, his hands shaking slightly as he took the letter from the butler and stared at the familiar handwriting. Miss Eleanor Blackwood. The words seemed to blur before his eyes. Thank you, Henderson. That will be all. The butler withdrew, and Thomas stood alone in the library, holding the letter that could change everything, or destroy everything. He broke the seal with trembling fingers and began to read. My lord, I hope this letter finds you well. I write to you today with a heavy heart, but with a spirit that is determined to speak the truth. I have spent the past 3 weeks wrestling with my emotions, and I have come to a conclusion that I must share with you. When I discovered the truth about your identity, I was devastated. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and deeply hurt. I had given you my heart, the most precious thing I possessed, and I believed you had accepted it under false pretenses. I believed you had lied to me about everything. But time has given me perspective, and perspective has given me clarity. You did not lie to me about your feelings. I know that now. I have replayed every moment we shared, every conversation we had, and I know with absolute certainty that the man I fell in love with was real. He was you, not the Earl of Ashworth, not the wealthy nobleman, but you, Thomas, the man who walked with me in the garden, who listened to my dreams, who held my hand and promised me a future. You were afraid. I understand that now in a way I did not before. I understand what it is to be judged by something other than who you truly are. I have spent my entire life being judged by my poverty, by my family's misfortune, by circumstances beyond my control. I know what it is to be seen not as a person but as a position, and I know what it is to want to escape. I am not writing to tell you that I forgive you. Forgiveness is not something that can be demanded or granted with a single letter. It is something that must be earned through time and effort and trust. But I am writing to tell you that I am willing to try. I am willing to give you the chance to show me who you truly are. Not the Earl. Not the wealthy nobleman. Not the man who hides behind his title. But you, Thomas, the man I fell in love with. If you are willing to be honest with me, I am willing to be honest with you. I am returning to Thornwood Manor next week. Lady Margaret has asked me to resume my duties, and Lord Thornwood has been kind enough to welcome me back. If you wish to see me, you know where I will be. Yours, Eleanor. Thomas read the letter 3 times. Then he read it a 4th time. Then he burst into tears. They were not tears of sorrow, but of relief, of overwhelming, impossible relief. She was giving him a chance. She was willing to try. She had not given up on him. He had not lost her after all. But he knew that he had to be careful. He had to show her that he had learned his lesson. He had to earn her trust, not demand it. He had to be honest with her, completely and utterly honest, from this moment forward. He could not hide behind his title. He could not pretend to be someone he was not. He had to be himself, the real himself, the man she had fallen in love with, the man who wanted nothing more than to build a life with her. He wrote his reply that very night. Eleanor arrived at Thornwood Manor on a cold January afternoon. The snow had begun to fall just as her carriage pulled up to the front door, and she watched the white flakes drift down as she gathered her belongings and prepared to enter the house. She was nervous. She had not admitted it to herself until this moment, but she was terrified. She had written that letter in a moment of clarity, but the clarity had faded, replaced by doubt. What if he did not come? What if he had changed his mind? What if she had been foolish to reach out? She stepped out of the carriage and walked toward the front door. And there he was. He was standing in the doorway, his dark hair dusted with snow, his eyes fixed on her as though she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Eleanor. Thomas. They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. I received your letter, he said finally. I know. She smiled, despite her nervousness. I wrote it. It was the most incredible letter I've ever read. It was just a letter. No. He stepped forward, taking her hands in his. It was everything. It was hope. It was forgiveness. It was a second chance I didn't deserve. You deserve it, Thomas. You always have. I don't know about that, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I do. He squeezed her hands gently. I'm going to be honest with you, Eleanor. Completely and utterly honest. I'm not going to hide behind my title. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm just going to be me. The man who loves you more than anything in this world. Thomas. I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I have to earn it, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust if that's what it takes. You don't have to spend the rest of your life. She laughed, despite the tears in her eyes. You just have to be honest with me. That's all I've ever wanted. I can do that. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I can promise you that much. I can promise you honesty and trust and a love that will never waver. I can promise you everything, Eleanor. Everything I have. Everything I am. I don't want everything you have. What do you want? I want you. She reached up, cupping his cheek with her hand. I've always wanted you, not the Earl. Not the fortune. Just you. He kissed her then, right there in the snow, with the wind howling around them and the snowflakes falling on their heads. And it was perfect. The next few weeks were a process of healing. Thomas and Eleanor spent hours together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, his years in the army, the devastation of inheriting a title that had been drained of its fortune. She told him about her father's death, her mother's illness, the slow, grinding poverty that had shaped her life. They shared secrets. They shared fears. They shared dreams. And slowly, gradually, trust began to grow between them. Eleanor saw the real Thomas Ashworth. Not the Earl of Ashworth, not the wealthy nobleman, but the man who had been wounded by his father's indifference, who had fought in wars and seen horrors he could never forget, who had come to Yorkshire seeking escape and found love instead. Thomas saw the real Eleanor Blackwood, not the poor merchant's daughter, not the companion, but the woman who had been broken by loss and rebuilt herself through sheer determination, who had given him her heart despite every reason not to, who had found the strength to forgive when he had least deserved it. They were not perfect. They argued sometimes. They disagreed. They had moments of doubt and fear and frustration. But they always came back to each other. Because they had learned something important, something that neither of them had fully understood before. Love was not about perfection. Love was about trust. And trust was something they were both willing to fight for. Thomas proposed to Eleanor on a clear winter evening. They were walking in the garden, the snow crunching beneath their feet, the moon casting silver light over everything. "Eleanor," he said, stopping in the middle of the path, "I have something to ask you." "What is it?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Thomas," her breath caught, "I know I don't deserve you." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a single diamond. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you. But I also know that I love you more than anything in this world. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Thomas, will you marry me?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Will you be my wife? Not the Countess of Ashworth. Not the mistress of a grand estate. My wife. My partner. My equal. Will you spend the rest of your life with me, building something real and honest and true?" Eleanor stared at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." And she kissed him with all the love in her heart. But their happiness was not destined to be simple. The first sign of trouble came in the form of Lady Beatrice Ashworth, Thomas's cousin. She arrived at Thornwood Manor unannounced, sweeping into the drawing room with all the grace of a woman who was used to getting exactly what she wanted. "Thomas, darling," she said, kissing him on both cheeks. "How wonderful to see you. I heard you were staying here and simply had to come visit." "Beatrice." Thomas's voice was wary. "What are you doing here? Can't a cousin visit her favorite relation?" She laughed, a tinkling sound that did not quite reach her eyes. "I've missed you, Thomas. You've been hiding away in the countryside for months. Everyone in London is simply dying to see you." "I've been busy." "Busy doing what?" Beatrice's gaze swept the room, landing on Eleanor. "And who is this?" "This is Miss Eleanor Blackwood." Thomas moved to stand beside Eleanor, taking her hand. "My fiancé." Beatrice's smile faltered. "Your fiancé?" she repeated. "Thomas, don't be ridiculous. You can't be engaged to a what?" Eleanor's voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "A companion? A poor merchant's daughter? A nobody?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Eleanor smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I'm quite familiar with the ways of society, Lady Beatrice. I know what people think of me." "Thomas, you really must be sensible." Beatrice turned to him, her voice urgent. "You can't marry someone like her. She's beneath you. Think of the scandal. Think of the family name. The family name can survive a scandal. Thomas's voice was cold. Especially when the scandal is that I've married the woman I love. Love. Beatrice laughed. But there was something desperate in the sound. Love is for poets and fools, Thomas. You need a wife who can help you restore the family fortunes. Someone with money. Someone with connections. Someone who can give you heirs and secure your legacy. I have everything I need. He squeezed Eleanor's hand. I have her. You're making a terrible mistake. I'm making the only decision that matters. He looked at Beatrice with no warmth in his eyes. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have some preparations to make for the wedding. Beatrice's face twisted with barely concealed fury. But she said nothing. She simply curtsied and left. And Thomas knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of it. Beatrice Ashworth was not a woman who accepted defeat easily. She had always believed that she would one day marry the Earl of Ashworth. She had planned for it. She had schemed for it. She had spent years ingratiating herself with his family, positioning herself as the perfect candidate for his wife. And now some nobody companion had stolen him away. It was unacceptable. Beatrice had returned to London with a single goal: to destroy the engagement between Thomas and Eleanor. She began with gossip. It was the easiest weapon in her arsenal. She spread rumors that Eleanor was a fortune hunter, a woman of loose morals, a manipulative creature who had trapped poor Thomas into marriage. Within weeks, the whispers had reached Yorkshire. Eleanor heard them in the village, from servants who looked at her with pity or contempt. She heard them from Lord Thornwood, who had received letters from friends in London warning him about his new secretary's unsuitable fiancée. She heard them from Thomas himself, who arrived at Thornwood Manor one afternoon looking as though he had aged 10 years in a single day. "She's doing this to hurt you," he told Eleanor, pacing the library. "Beatrice is spreading rumors to try to break us apart. She's telling everyone that you—" "I know what she's telling everyone." Eleanor's voice was calm. "I've heard the rumors. And you're not upset?"
I'm angry.
She met his eyes, her gaze steady.
I'm furious.
"But I'm not going to let her win. I'm not going to let her destroy what we have. Eleanor, I've spent my entire life being judged by people like her." She stepped forward, taking his hands. "I've been called a fortune hunter. I've been called a nobody. I've been told that I'm not good enough for anything or anyone. And I've learned that those words only have power if I let them. You are good enough." His voice was fierce. "You're more than good enough. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Then prove it." She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made his heart ache. "Marry me. Let's go to London and show them all that I'm not afraid. London. It's time." She squeezed his hands. "It's time to face them. All of them. Beatrice and her gossip and everyone who's ever looked down on me. I'm not going to hide anymore, Thomas. I'm going to stand beside you and show them exactly who I am. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The Earl of Ashworth and his fiancée arrived in London with all the subtlety of a thunderclap. They stayed at Ashworth House, the grand mansion in Mayfair that had been in Thomas's family for generations. Eleanor walked through its elegant halls with a mixture of awe and determination. She knew that Beatrice and her allies were waiting for them. She knew that the gossip mill was already churning, spreading lies and half-truths and cruel insinuations. And she knew that she had to face it head-on. The first test came at a ball hosted by the Dowager Duchess of Wiltshire. Eleanor had never attended such an event. She had dreamed of them as a girl. The glittering lights, the beautiful gowns, the elegant music. But she had never imagined that she would actually be a part of one. Now she stood in the doorway of the ballroom, her arm linked with Thomas's, and tried not to let her nerves show. "You look beautiful," Thomas murmured in her ear. You're the most stunning woman in this room. I feel like a fraud. Then look like a queen. His hand tightened on hers. Because that's what you are. My queen. She lifted her chin and stepped into the room. The whispers began immediately. Who is that woman? She's the Earl of Ashworth's fiancée. His fiancée? But I heard she was just a... Shoo. She'll hear you. Is she really from the country? She's a nobody. A poor merchant's daughter. Beatrice told me all about her. Eleanor heard every word. But she did not let them show on her face. She smiled. She nodded. She curtsied to the Dowager Duchess and made polite conversation with the other guests. And slowly, gradually, the whispers began to change. She's surprisingly well-spoken. Did you see how she handled Lady Montague's rudeness? She has a certain elegance, doesn't she? She's actually quite charming. By the end of the evening, Eleanor had won over more than a few of the guests. But Beatrice was not done. It happened a week later. Eleanor had been shopping with Thomas in Bond Street when Beatrice appeared as though from nowhere. "Thomas," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "What a pleasant surprise." "Beatrice." Thomas's voice was cold. "What do you want? Can't a cousin simply want to say hello?" She smiled, but her eyes were fixed on Eleanor. "I see you've brought your little companion along. Eleanor is my fiancée. I expect you to treat her with respect." Of course, of course." Beatrice's smile widened. "It's just that I was so surprised to hear about your engagement, especially given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "The circumstances of the inheritance, of course." Beatrice's eyes glittered with malice. "Haven't you heard? The will has been found. The one that clearly states the title passes to the next male heir if the current earl marries a commoner." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. "What?" Thomas's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. My father never had such a will." "He did, darling." Beatrice's smile was triumphant. "I found it myself, tucked away in the family archives. It's been witnessed and signed. Completely legal. If you marry her, you lose everything. The title, the fortune, everything." "You're lying." "Am I?" Beatrice reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Read it for yourself. It's all there, in your father's handwriting." Thomas took the paper with shaking hands. His face grew whiter with every word. "Thomas." Eleanor's voice was small. "What does it say?" He looked at her, and there was devastation in his eyes. "It's true," he whispered. "My father made a will disinheriting me if I married anyone beneath my rank. He must have done it years ago, before I even met you. Then I won't marry you." Eleanor stepped back, her heart shattering. "I won't let you lose everything because of me." "Eleanor." "I mean it, Thomas." She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I won't be the reason you lose your title. I won't be the reason you lose your inheritance. I won't do that to you. I don't care about the title. I don't care about the fortune. I care about you. You can't marry me. You'll lose everything. I'll lose everything if I don't marry you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eleanor looked at him. The man she loved, the man who had lied to her, the man who had fought for her, the man who was willing to give up everything for her. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't let you sacrifice your future for me. This isn't a sacrifice." He stepped forward, taking her hands. "This is the only choice I've ever made that truly matters. Marrying you is the best thing I've ever done. And I'll choose you every single time, no matter the cost." "Thomas." "I love you, Eleanor." His voice was fierce. "I love you more than any title, any fortune, any inheritance. You're all that matters to me, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Beatrice stared at them, her victory crumbling. You can't be serious, she said. You're throwing away everything. I'm throwing away nothing. Thomas turned to face her, his eyes blazing. I'm choosing the one thing that truly matters. And you, he pointed at her. You're the one who's lost. You tried to destroy us, but you failed. Because our love is stronger than any scheme you could devise. Beatrice's face went white. This isn't over, she hissed. Yes, it is. Thomas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You've shown me exactly who you are, Beatrice, and I want nothing to do with you. If I ever hear another whisper of gossip, another rumor, another attempt to hurt Eleanor, I'll have you thrown out of society. Do you understand me? Beatrice stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned and walked away, and Eleanor and Thomas were alone. The will turned out to be a forgery. It took several weeks for Thomas's solicitors to prove it, but they eventually discovered that Beatrice had hired a forger to create a document that would prevent the marriage. She had been desperate. She had been jealous. And she had been careless. The forger had made a mistake. A small one, barely noticeable, but it was enough to prove that the will was fake. Beatrice was disgraced. The rumors about Eleanor were proven false. And Thomas and Eleanor were free to marry. The wedding took place on a beautiful spring day. Eleanor wore a simple white gown, embroidered with tiny flowers. She carried a bouquet of roses and lilies, her favorite flowers. Thomas wore his uniform, the one he had worn in the army. It felt right, somehow, a reminder of the man he had been before the weight of the title had fallen on his shoulders. They exchanged vows in the small church at Thornwood, with Lord Thornwood and Lady Margaret as witnesses. Do you, Eleanor Blackwood, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?
Ido.
Do you, Thomas Ashworth, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?
Ido.
I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Thomas lifted Eleanor's veil and kissed her with all the love in his heart. And in that moment none of the rest mattered. Not the title, not the fortune, not the scheming, not the gossip. Only the two of them together at last. They spent their honeymoon in Scotland. It was Thomas's idea. He had always wanted to see the Highlands, and he wanted to share the experience with Eleanor. They traveled through misty valleys and along crystal-clear lochs, staying in small inns and grand manor houses alike. And every night, Thomas held Eleanor in his arms and thanked God that he had found her. Are you happy? He asked one evening, as they sat by the fire in their cozy inn room. Happy doesn't even begin to describe it. She nestled closer to him. I never imagined that I could feel this way, this safe, this loved, this whole. I know what you mean. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I spent so long running from my title, from my responsibilities, from everything that made me who I was. I thought I could escape it all by pretending to be someone else. But the truth is, I was never running from my title. I was running from myself. And now I'm not running anymore. He looked down at her, his eyes full of love. Now I know that I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be anything other than who I am. Because you love me for exactly who I am. Of course I do. She reached up, touching his face gently. I always have. Even when I was angry. Even when I was hurt. I loved you, Thomas. I just had to learn to trust you again. Can I tell you a secret? What? When I came to Thornwood, I planned to stay for a week. Just 1 week. I thought I would escape the pressures of my life and then return to reality. But then I met you and I couldn't leave. Was that really your plan? Yes. He laughed, shaking his head at his own foolishness. I was a coward. I ran away from my problems instead of facing them. And then I found you, and I discovered that the problem wasn't my title. The problem was that I didn't know who I was outside of it. And who are you?
I'm yours.
He kissed her, soft and sweet. I'm a man who loves his wife more than anything in the world. I'm a man who will spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of her. You already are worthy, Thomas. She cupped his face in her hands. You always have been. I love you, Eleanor. I love you too. And in the quiet of the Scottish Highlands, with the fire crackling and the wind howling outside, they held each other and knew that they had found something rare and precious. They had found home. They returned to Ashworth House to find that things had changed. Beatrice had fled the country in disgrace, unable to face the consequences of her schemes. The gossip that had once painted Eleanor as a fortune hunter had turned against Beatrice, revealing her true nature. Thomas had been reinstated as the Earl of Ashworth, with all the rights and privileges that came with the title. And Eleanor was now the Countess of Ashworth. It was a role she had never imagined she would play, but she was determined to do it well. She visited the tenants. She organized charitable events. She met with the servants and learned their names. She made Ashworth House a home, not just a grand estate. And through it all, Thomas supported her every step of the way. This is your home now, he told her. You can make it whatever you want it to be. Then I'm going to make it a place where no one feels forgotten. She looked at him, her eyes shining. I'm going to make it a place where everyone knows they matter. That sounds perfect. It's what you showed me, Thomas. She took his hands in hers. You showed me that I mattered. Even when I was nothing. Even when I was nobody. You saw me, and you believed in me. I always believed in you. Then I'm going to do the same for others. She smiled, a warm, radiant smile that lit up the room. I'm going to be the kind of countess that people remember. A year passed, then 2, then 5. Thomas and Eleanor built a life together, one that was full of love and laughter and quiet contentment. They had 2 children, a boy named William and a girl named Margaret. They raised them with the same values that had brought them together: honesty, trust, and the belief that a person's worth is measured by their heart, not their station. Eleanor became known as one of the most beloved countesses in England. She was respected not because of her title, but because of her kindness, her generosity, and her unwavering belief in the goodness of others. Thomas became a better man because of her. He learned to be honest. He learned to be open. He learned that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a strength. And they lived happily ever after. Not because life was easy. Not because they never argued. Not because they never faced challenges. But because they faced them together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. On the evening of their 25th wedding anniversary, Thomas and Eleanor walked through the garden of Ashworth House. Do you remember the first time we met? Thomas asked, his voice soft with nostalgia. Of course I do. Eleanor smiled, the memory warming her heart. You were walking through the garden, and I was cutting flowers. I had dirt on my hands and a hole in my dress. I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. You were staring at me like I was a ghost. Because you were perfect. He stopped walking, turning to face her. You were everything I had ever wanted. And I was terrified that I would never have you. But you did have me. She reached up, touching his face the way she had done so many times before. You had me from the very beginning. I don't deserve you. You've said that before. I'll keep saying it. He pressed his forehead to hers. Because I don't deserve you. But I'm grateful for you. Every single day of my life, I'm grateful for you. Thomas, I love you, Eleanor. His voice was fierce, full of all the love he had carried for a quarter of a century. I've loved you since the moment I met you. I've loved you through lies and truth, through scandal and forgiveness, through joy and sorrow and everything in between. And I will love you until my dying breath. Eleanor looked at him. The man she had married, the man she had loved, the man who had given her everything. I love you too, Thomas. She kissed him gently, More than words can say. They stood there in the moonlight holding each other, and in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the roses they had planted together, they knew that they had found something rare and precious. They had found love. They had found trust. They had found home. I want to know, would you have forgiven Thomas? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely love reading your perspectives. If the story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We release new historical romance stories every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Don't forget to share this video with someone who believes in second chances and happy endings. Your support helps us grow and continue bringing you these unforgettable tales. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next story. Until then, keep believing in love, trust, and the courage to start again.